Welcome to Soils Lab number 4 for AGPR201 Basic Soil Science. In an earlier lab, we learned how to determine the texture of a soil by feel. In this lab, we're going to be taking a soil sample and determining the textural class of that soil based upon sedimentation. Now, you will have a lab handout, or in your packet you have this lab handout, which is entitled Soil Texture, Density, and Porosity. Today we will be completing part 1 of this lab, which is soil texture. As we go through this lab, I will be demonstrating the procedures used to determine texture by this sedimentation method, similar to what I did in the introductory lab to this course, where I determined soil texture by feel. In order to determine soil texture by sedimentation, we need to use a 50-gram sample of soil. This sample of soil needs to have the clods or aggregates removed. So in order to accomplish this, I will use a mortar and pestle to remove the aggregates or clods in the soil sample and then weigh out 50 grams of soil. The reason that we're going to remove these clods or aggregates is because we need to get this soil broken down into a single grain nature so that the individual particles will separate or settle independently of each other. To also assist us in this process, once we've got this soil sample broken down and weighed out, will be the use of a dispersing agent. This dispersing agent, which is called sodium hexametaphosphate, is designed to allow these soil particles to not want to be attracted to each other, but rather to separate independently of each other. Now, in this handout, you have a formula, and that formula is used to determine the settling rate or the velocity at which these various soil particles will settle. Well, basically, we're not going to be working with that formula per se, but what we will be working with is information that's derived from that formula. That formula tells us that sand-sized particles will settle out of a soil suspension in 40 seconds. It tells us that silt-sized particles will settle out of a soil in approximately 2 to 2.5 hours. And for the purpose of this lab, we will be using the 2-hour time interval from the time that we've last suspended them until we believe that the silt-sized particles have settled out. Once we've determined the amount of sand and or the amount of silt, we can simply determine the clay by difference, because the clay will be the amount of soil that is remaining in suspension at the end of this 2-hour time period. So what is this telling us in terms of these various particles? Well, it's telling us that clay-sized particles are quite small, and being as small as what they are, they will not settle out even within this 2-hour time period. So this gives us a little bit better feel for just how small clay particles really are. And to give you another analogy of that, if we said that the clay-sized particle was, theoretically speaking, the size of a basketball, then we would have a medium silt-sized particle represented as being about the size of your average 3-bedroom house. So where then would that put an average sand-sized particle? Well, it would put an average sand-sized particle approximately the size of a good mountain, such as Mount Rainier here in western Washington. So this gives us an analogy that we can use for comparison, but the actual diameters as listed in your lab are clay particles or anything which are less than 0.002 millimeters in terms of effective diameter. Silt-sized particles range from above 0.002 up through 0.05 millimeters in effective diameter, and the sand-sized particles are those which are from 0.05 up through 2.0 millimeters. So you can see that there's a very large range in there from 0.05 to 2.0 for sand-sized particles, and according to the USDA system of particle size classification, sand is actually broken into 5 different subcategories, all the way from very fine to very coarse. Well, based on what we're doing here in the lab today, this sedimentation test will give us total sand. It doesn't allow us to break it into those 5 individual categories. And then we'll also determine silt based on the settling rate at the end of 2 hours.